So the question is, how do we define a species? We had talked about biodiversity, and probably, as we had said, the concept of biodiversity that is sort of most commonly thrown around is species biodiversity. And so we say, well, what is a species? I mean, I mentioned some of my mentors, or one of my mentors, Merrill Sweet, and I'd said, at some point earlier this semester, and I'd said that he's a stink bug expert. And so he would go out and he loves stink bugs. Who knew? So he would go out and he would find stink bugs and try and figure out, is this a new species or is it just a variation on an existing species? So the question is, how do you define what is a species? And if you're talking about turkeys or yeah, we'll take the example of a turkey. We have this idea of a biological species concept, and this is the traditional way biologists have thought about what is a species. And what it is, it's a group of interbreeding individuals. So it's a group of individuals that are mating together and having reproductively viable offspring. So what that means is, if you cross, I mean, a horse and a donkey can mate, and they'll have a baby, but that will then be something called a mule, and that mule is sterile. So you have to be able to, the offspring have to be able to have babies as well. So a biological species concept is a group of interbreeding individuals that can produce reproductively viable offspring. And so, but how do you do that if you're a stink bug guy? How do you know who is mating with whom? It's pretty hard to know. We have stink bugs around, but I never really see that part of their life. So the question is, there are a lot of species that it's very hard to evaluate in that manner. And so with the advent of molecular genetics and molecular biology, people say, well, who cares about that? We don't need to see that. We can just analyze their genes. And groups of organisms, groups of individuals that share similar genes, you can say, oh, okay, these are similar enough. That's a species. And that is what we call the phylogenetic species concept. Now, again, though, the problem is, at some point, obviously the individuals that have a lot of similarity in genes, you'd say, yeah, of course, they are the same species. But then within a species, we have variation. And so where do you draw the line? And so that's sort of the difficulty we have with the phylogenetic species concept. Now the other species concept you're a little bit familiar with because you did a phylogenetic tree, which is looking at evolutionary changes. Remember we did that little lab thing where we had the animalcules, and we had started with this one individual and they gradually changed over time. And so we have this third kind of species concept, which basically looks at the fossil record. It looks at the fossil record, and it's called the evolutionary species concept. And so you can look back in time at the historical geology, at the way species are changing, and you say, oh, well, we now know this, that birds have evolved from dinosaurs, and so you can follow them up through the evolution that is recorded in the rocks. The changes over time, they're recorded in the rocks, and you can determine species in that manner. So the third concept, species concept, is the evolutionary species concept.